So this is essentially the first episode in this whole idea. There's a lot of podcasts out there and a lot of streaming scenarios and interviews where they're talking about techniques, and it gets a little bit more down the rabbit hole on the fishing side. And what I want to do is take an opportunity here to kind of, separate this whole idea and this whole interview. What I want to start doing is getting more on the front end side of, how did you grow up? More so about like your background, your path. I know you and I have talked about like making the leap from BFLs to the Costas, which is now the Toyota series, right? And we talked about making the leap from there to the elites, and how do you know when that opportunity is there and when the timing is right? And I think that some of these interviews, some of the discussions that I've had, sorry, a little man's in the background.
I can hear him.
So, hey, Jackson, can you chill? Thank you. All right. So, what I want to do is kind of take the opportunity to step back and really, walk through the process, right? And I know we've read a couple things about you on BASS and stuff like that, but I just really wanted to sit down and start this one and the next couple of them going forward. And this will probably be the whole series will be focused on the backstory of the anglers and giving these one-on-one interviews, one-on-one, like doc talk, right? It's information that other anglers wouldn't get outside of, being a part of these discussions. So I think this is a way to bring that to a much larger medium.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's a great idea. So
it's kind of a little bit of a synopsis on what we're looking to do here. So we'll kind of get into some of the questions coming up here first. And I guess take us back to kind of you growing up and getting into bass fishing, how that transition happened and kind of how the whole thing started.
Yeah. So for me, I grew up in a fishing family. My dad's really big into fishing. My uncle is, it's just kind of been passed around, but not bass fishing at all, which is kind of ironic. My dad's really big into, fishing on the Great Lakes, trolling salmon and lake trout. And that's where I got my start, I guess. I just kind of grew up in that environment. And, as a young kid, you're not going to go out on the boat when there's 5 and 6 footers out on Lake Huron. So I got to stick around the boat harbors a lot, and I'd sit there and fish for bluegill and, bass, whatever I could really catch. And, it was really fortunate in that aspect just to, have the outdoors, presented to me in that way, but not forcing to do anything. My dad was never like, oh, you need to go and try to catch this. You need to come with me and do this. He just showed me the outdoors, showed me what fishing was. And I kind of ran with it. And once I caught a couple of the first, I'd say bigger largemouth, which now are, we're talking like 15 inches, as a young kid, big fish. Once I caught my first couple of those, I was hooked instantly. The way they jumped, the way they fought. I saw a couple of them actually eat the bait. I was using live minnows. So I'd see the fish come up and eat the minnow off the surface. And once that happened, that was it for me. Every time we'd go up north and stop at a tackle store, I made my dad buy me a fishing book about bass, and I did all I could. I'd read about it, I'd learn about it, and just took a really big interest in it to where even if he asked me to go offshore and fish for salmon, I'd say no, sit at the boat harbors and do that and spend all my time doing that. And then, I was really fortunate that he supported a lot, and he actually sold his salmon boat for a few years when I was like 13 or 14, and we bought a family bass boat.
Okay.
And he didn't know anything about bass fishing, but he'd take me out. We go to the local lakes around the house and kind of just let me run the show. It was kind of pathetic how far off we were. We'd go days and days without catching anything, but that's how we learned. It was just going out there and learning. And as I became comfortable on a lake by my house, I'd go to another lake, and what would take me 6 months to feel comfortable on one lake, eventually it took, 6 weeks. And then the next lake, it took 3 weeks, and then it took a week. And, I kind of started learning like that and just fishing every lake around the house I could. Once I turned 16, I jumped in the tournament scene and, just started to work up the ranks from there. But yeah, my fishing start was I didn't have a bass fishing start at all, but it kind of worked out good. My dad, showed me the outdoors and let me kind of do my thing.
All right. So, one of the questions I had here is, do you remember like your first bass, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I remember it was on a minnow, like a 2-inch minnow, just on a hook right through the back of the minnow. And I pitched about 10 feet from the dock and caught like an 8 or 10 inch bass. But just seeing the fish come up and bite it, I mean, it'll never go away. And then my second bass, well, or I guess my second bass, which was like maybe 16 inches, I caught on a lizard off of a bed. And
All right.
I worked it for like 4 hours in that boat harbor. I put him back, and then I liked it so much I went and caught him like 4 hours later. So
Yeah, I think everybody
yeah,
started catching fish on lizards if you started with an old Texas rig. Like that was
yeah,
kind of the deal a long time ago when you first started getting into it.
it was. It was. I mean, like I said, I read an old school, in fisherman book about largemouth. They said to put a lizard on there, so that's what I did.
Yeah, I actually used to fish. It's kind of funny. Like my first big bass came on an old like Hank Parker man's lizard. That was
Okay.
like they were like terrible banana flavored. I don't even know why we thought it was like it was
Yeah,
something that was good, but
that's
that was
funny.
the first big bass I caught was down in Florida at a little pond. But yeah, I remember stuff
Okay,
like that
awesome.
too. Um, so kind of go back then and your first tournament. Obviously, you said kind of growing up, you had to at a young age, you were starting to learn how to break down water and starting to
Hmm.
learn how to get into the tournament scene, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, what was that like? What was kind of like first? Do you remember your first tournament? How did you do?
Yeah, I'll say a couple. So I fished my first bass tournament ever when I was 15. It was actually it came up north in Alpena with a buddy of mine that I had met, and it was kind of funny. It was a friend, one of my dad's salmon fishing friends, and my dad was like, "Yeah, you should take this kid out. My kid, he loves to bass fish." And the guy was, I could tell he was kind of weary. He's like, "Oh, I don't really want to take a 15-year-old out." We fished for like 2 hours, and this was a little bit of a process to get out for him to take me out. He was like the only guy we knew that had a bass boat at the time, so he took me out. And after like an hour and a half, he's like, "Hey man, you want to fish a tournament on Tuesday?" So we did that. It was just like a little 3 fish tournament. I think we came in second. So that was like my first true experience, but it was just so exciting. I mean, to do that. When I turned 16 and I got my truck, then I actually started fishing like as much as I could, as many tournaments as I can. And the first one I fished was on the lake that I spent the most time on. It's called Belleville Lake. Probably one of the worst lakes in Michigan, honestly. But it's a
I don't know. Ford,
reservoir.
Ford's pretty bad. Ford's pretty bad. I
Yeah,
don't. I don't know.
yeah, Ford you'll catch a little more fish than Belleville, but the size isn't as good. But yeah, it was just a lake that I knew really well, and so that's where I started off fishing tournaments. Obviously, and the first one I remembered, I guess there was kind of like some unwritten rules about like where you're supposed to run and not. And I didn't know any of these, so like I remember we all came out through this bridge, and then I cut through this island, and I was like the ninth boat through the bridge, and I cut this island like this 6-inch sand flat, and I
Oh
was leading
wow.
everybody out. I was leading after that point, and I cut this, and everyone was kind of like all mad about it, but I didn't know any better. I mean, I didn't know that was a rule, or not a rule, but like an unofficial rule, and I was really dialed in practice. I had a ton of bites fishing up this river, and I went up there for like the first 4 hours and never had a bite. And it was pretty, that was a pretty good reality check in the first tournament right there. Like, hey, every day is different. And I remember running all the way down the lake, which it's not a huge lake, but it's probably like 6-7 miles long. Picked off a couple of keepers and then ran all the way back up the river with like an hour left and caught the two biggest fish of the tournament. It had like 14 and a half pounds, which is probably one of the biggest bags out there to date.
That's pretty
So
sweet.
yeah, so after that being my first tournament, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be easy, and it definitely wasn't. But that was my first tournament, so it was a pretty memorable one.
So what's the talking about that? What would be the biggest tournament? I think that you had one of those moments as well. Like so when you made the transition from like the BFLs to the Costas, and then you made the transition to the Opens, then you made the transition to the Elites. Has there been one of those other type of moments where you've been like, dude, this is not what I expected, or this is way harder than I expected, and it's more of a grind? Have you had that experience then
Oh
since that first
yeah,
tournament?
yeah, definitely. So I didn't fish a ton. I fished really like local tournaments around the house. I really didn't fish BFLs because the BFLs around here are in St. Clair, and I feel like if you learn St. Clair, you're actually setting yourself behind to go fish around the country. I mean, I think St. Clair's the best lake in the world. but you're not going to go and fish St. Clair, then run down to Gunnersville and feel comfortable. So that's why I suck around all the reservoirs and things. So I fished around the state the first year, actually really close to the house. And then the next year I kind of branched out, fished around the whole state. Third year, I branched out and fished like the region, Ohio, Indiana. And the fourth year I started to do the first year I did the Rayovacs, which it would have been. But I'd say that realization was probably when I fished the Opens the first year, which would have been when I was 20 or 21. I just remember on the James River, I went out there and I had like a really tough day and I made some good adjustments. And I felt like I fished like as well as I could have. And I had like 10 pounds or something. And I was so proud of it. And you come in, you're in 40th, which is not bad at all.
No, but like, it's interesting to have those moments where like you make that decision or you have a good tournament. Like you had good decisions that you made. Maybe the outcome didn't go the way that it could have, but you still put yourself in a good spot and you scrambled and ground out,
Right. Well, I think it was just, the realization was there when I felt like I literally almost had a perfect day, in my opinion. I was like, man, I don't know how I could have done better. And then you come in, you're like, there's still, 30 something guys that beat me today. Like, this is for real. These guys can catch them. So that was the big realization that, this is a serious game and these guys, they're not going to let you just come in here and like walk and do whatever you want. But I'll say the next year at the James, I finished fourth. And that was like the moment I kind of felt like everything in my life changed. It went from when I was fishing the Opens and the Costas or whatever you want to call them. I always felt like I was hanging on, like I was getting some checks, but like there's that kind of part of you. It's like, are you good enough to win one of these things? Cause I mean, they're just so incredibly hard to win. When I got fourth and I really had the bites to easily win the tournament, I kind of sat back and I was like, all right, you can do this. So
how do you take a tournament like that? If you get the bites to win a tournament, but you don't get them in the boat, it's a discussion I've had with a couple other anglers. How do you walk away from that tournament feeling, like, do you kind of go through that mode where you're kind of angry, or do you look at it and say like, you know what, I had the bites, I didn't get them in the boat, I still consider that like getting those fish in the boat? How do you?
Fishing to me is it's not like a boxing match where you can go and like dominate your opponent, and like enforce yourself. To me, it's just all about effort. I mean, that's literally the only thing you can really control is your effort. So if you go out there and put in 100% effort and you win or lose, I think you just live with it. I mean, there's so many things that you can't control. I can't go out there and be in better shape than somebody and push them around and win, it just doesn't happen. So if you're going to go out there, if you work your absolute hardest and someone beats you, you just sit back there and shake their hand. If you work your hardest and your hooks are sharp and your line's right and a fish jumps off of the boat, it is what it is. So, the one thing about that tournament is the one thing that haunts me, and this wouldn't have made me win, but I probably would have came in like second, is I was skipping a lot of trees in that tournament. And I was using 50-pound braid with a frog. And I looked at my line and it was a little bit rough. Like just the whole thing, like you could tell it was used. But I really like having used braid because it casts so much nicer. Mm-hmm. It was only 3 or 4 days old. It wasn't like it was months old. But I just had a weird feeling. I was like, man, that line for some reason, it just gave me just even think about it the night before the final day was strange. And first bite I get is like I know it was a 6-pounder. It was the exact fish that I hooked in practice and caught like 5 days before, and I broke it off. I mean, very first thing in the morning. And it's just like, how do you have that feeling the night before? And then that happens. Like, so that stings obviously, but no, I think, I went out there, I worked my hardest, and it is what it is.
So, obviously you took that out of, sorry here for a second, trying to get this sorted out here. There we go. All right. So you make that leap. One of the questions I have that I've asked a couple of, my other friends that are, and one thing I want to make a point of is that I think a lot of people like myself or other people are always afraid to ask you guys questions like, hey, how would you approach this? What I've realized through talking with like yourself, Cliff Crochet, Cody Meyer, just some people I've been in proximity, you guys are a lot more approachable than people probably think.
For sure, yeah.
I think that's one of the misnomers out there is that, And I'm sure there are some anglers out there that may be in that like negative area where they don't really want to talk, they don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like for the most part, the whole angling community is out there. And if you ask a question, they're willing to work together. And I'm a big proponent, and it's called the golden circle theory. So like Simon Sinek talks about it, which is like, if you surround yourself with millionaires, or you surround yourself with the people that you want to emulate, chances are you're going to follow down that path if you make the right decisions and you listen to their advice, and you just kind of are in that proximity area where you're picking up information and doc talk and stuff like that, stuff that you maybe normally wouldn't know about or ask or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are making the transition, I guess the question is, what made you make the transition from the Costas at the time, the Toyota Series now, to go to the Opens? Because I think, if I remember correctly, you were in a spot within the Costas to fish the pro circuit at that time, were you not?
No. I actually, when I qualified for both at the same time.
Okay, that's what I meant. It was like 2018-ish, right around there, 2018, I think. So what made you decide one versus the other? What kind of drove that?
Like, as far as I felt like the Elite Series versus the Tour.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, for me, dude, I grew up watching the Elite. It was always about bass for me.
Okay.
I fish both because I love to fish, and I think the Costas, and probably even to this day, they might go to a little better lakes per that time of year. Like, they really go to some awesome places. So I like their scheduling usually a little better. That's why I was fishing those. But for me, it was always going to be about if I can make the Elite Series, that's where I wanted to be. I mean, that's just, to me, it's just the most iconic. So it wasn't really much of a decision, and it turned out to be a pretty good one now with everything.
Well, yeah,
on.
and we'll talk about that in a minute, because like
Yeah.
I still want to ask you, like, what is it like to get into the Century Club? Because not a lot of guys have done that, right? So
Yeah.
it's you. So you went from the youth side, you went through kind of like your late teenager years fishing a lot of inland lakes around Michigan and the region. Now, one thing you hit on was talking about St. Clair. Now, I want explain that a little bit. Like, I know you said St. Clair kind of ruins anglers, but I kind of want to talk about that because I feel I'm kind of in the same boat with you. But maybe for the same reasons, maybe for a different reason, but hit on that. Why did you not spend a whole lot of time on St. Clair?
Yeah, for me, I'm a very statistical person. I mean, I simply look at things, I watch patterns, stuff like that. And I hope I don't offend anybody. There's a lot of really good anglers in the state that really struggle out of the state. I mean, struggle. So, I mean, as a younger kid, I realized that pretty quickly. And, that was what it was. I just figured, that what they were learning on Lake St. Clair, and I'm not taking anything away from it, because Lake St. Clair is not an easy place to fish, even though it's really good. It's just not translating to go down south and compete. So I just figured I was going to spend my time on largemouth. I knew I was going to fish largemouth tournaments 75-80% of the time if I wanted to if I were to make the Elite Series. So I stuck on largemouth, and I fished every single reservoir that I had access to, essentially.
That's kind of the same thing that I noticed down there. And like, I went down to Gunnersville, and we've been down to like Jordan Lake, which we just, filmed an episode down there. But spots, I think Alabama spots are really similar to smallmouth. Like, I had a smallmouth rod in my rod locker, a drop shot rod that I picked up that I was using on Erie like a month before, and I'm catching spots on the same technique. But it's a little bit different when you're talking about spots and really like current generated Coosa River type fish. But the reservoirs, I noticed, there's just nothing like Erie, St. Clair. I think the only thing you could possibly even say that's somewhat close might be the Detroit River. And that would be still kind of pushing it, just because those fish set up pretty, I would say, pretty standard. When you go to the Detroit River, you kind of know where they're going to be at, what they're going to do, based on what the wind's doing, what the current's going to do, right?
Yeah. And I'm not trying to like dog these places and say that they won't help you. I mean, they definitely will. If you want to get confidence in techniques and learn how to really fine tune tackle, there's no better places, because you're not going to go through the numbers of fish that you're going to go through. When I go to the St. Lawrence River, it's the St. Clair River or Detroit River to me, but 100 times easier. So like, I'm not saying that they're not to stay away from them for that reason. I'm just saying statistically, and my life is all about statistics. Statistically, you're going to be in places 75 to 80% of the time where that you're not going to feel comfortable on. So what would you give to an angler, like if they were
This region's a little different. We're kind of spoiled in an essence with
Oh, sure.
Erie, St. Clair, Detroit River. Like we're kind of spoiled just because I don't think guys realize how fertile this area is of the country. But I mean,
Right.
big bag's a largemouth, big bag's a smallmouth. I mean, you can go catch them everywhere. And
Yeah, if there's not ice in the lakes, they're biting. It is what it is.
And like you said, like you can pick up a bait. And this is one thing I tell a lot of guys: you can pick up a bait up here and pick up a strategy. You can pick up a Tokyo rig, a chatterbait, whatever it is. And if you're not comfortable with that bait, you can sit up here in this area of the country and you can just go throw it. And eventually you'll run into fish and figure out how to throw the bait and the presentation and everything. How does that transfer to other bodies of water within the country?
As far as like
like learning a technique, learning a bait. How have you taken some of the techniques that you've learned, like throwing a chatterbait on Erie with the way the fish set up? Is it the same as they set up on like Gunnersville? Because it's completely different setup, it seems, with the channels and the way the whole lake sets up.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. More so I guess how the fish set up, maybe not as similar. I mean, if you understand current, like you're gonna have to understand current if you're gonna fish around the country. So you will learn about current. The fish are gonna be on the front side if they're active. They're gonna be in, all of that stuff. But the one thing is, I guess, learning the intricacies of a bait. It's one thing to know a chatterbait, but it's one thing to know, hey, this trailer makes this bait do this, and this is better when it's warm out because it keeps it high. Or hey, when it's a cold front, I'm going to a really slender chatterbait trailer. It's getting the bait down an extra foot. I'm getting more bites. So I think that's where we really have an advantage. I think the northern guys, for the most part, they seem like they're really in tune with their tackle. And I think it's just because we get more repetition for catching fish and learning things. If you're going to go down south, or if you're even living down south in the summer, you might only get 6 chances to catch a fish. And that makes it tough to figure out, hey, these are the treble hooks I want because they're not going to jump off, right? You're not going to go through 30 to 50 fish and really experiment. So I think really fine tuning things is where, this region really helps. Because the reality is when you're going to go and practice for a major tournament, there's no time to learn that stuff.
Right.
You don't have time to learn, is 8 pound on my drop shot better than 6 pound and why? I mean, you have to know these things, or what worm to put on this for this application. You have to be all about finding fish. So if you can know, what baits to use and what presentation and setup and all of that beforehand, it makes things a lot easier for you because you're just focused on the fish now.
So there's a big push right now on the electronic side. And one thing I want to talk about is, this area of the country kind of lacks some of the structure that you typically find and things that you find down in these reservoirs and these other big, massive lakes like Chickamauga and, TVA impoundments. How do you make that adjustment to learn how those fish set up and how to see them on your graph instead of looking at, St. Clair and Erie are kind of featureless bowls to an extent, right? Like there's some structure you'll find them on, but for the most part, they don't have the same submerged road beds and creek channels and river channels that they have, down south. So how did you make that adjustment and that transition?
Yeah. I mean, first thing with the internet being out there, there's so much access to information, and I think you have to take that seriously if you're going to do it. There's so many YouTube videos and all that, but it's really just getting down there and doing it. Like I remember my first time to Kentucky Lake. Here where we live, obviously it's all about like a drop off if there is one. So when I went down there and I was ledge fishing, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go look at these drop offs and I'm gonna see them on the graph like everyone posts. And I think I did it for like 4 days and I saw like one school of fish. And then the last 3 hours, I was actually like eating a sandwich and I rode up on top of the structure and all of a sudden these fish started showing up everywhere. So I mean, and then obviously you could pattern that real quick and find some more, but it's really, you just kind of have to go out there and do it. And it is tough because you're at a disadvantage. You didn't grow up doing it like some of these guys, but you just have to, put your nose down and get to work. I mean, that's the tough part about being a Northern angler is you're lacking experience in some of these things, but at the same time, I'm trying to think like some of the stuff down south, it's almost really obvious compared to how it is up here, because you're not going to really scan a school of fish up here and start fishing it. Like you might see 1 or 2, but most of the time, and I'm sure you're aware, like, you're going to see a rock pile and it's like, okay, let's go fish that. And you got to kind of figure out if there's fish on it or a weed edge. Whereas down south, because it is so clean and the bottom's not all covered up in grass, they expose themselves. So it kind of works both ways. Is kind of getting the feel of how the fish position on the structure is different. But once you figure that out, if you're proficient with your graphs, you can really make quick work of it because it just shows everything. The fish, there's not as much things for them to hide into.
So do you have a specific area or like a specific group or YouTube or anybody that you can name off the top of your head that would be a good person to go get information from on how to set up your graphs and how to learn, reading them?
Yeah. I know like Tactical Bassin has some really good stuff. I pretty much watch every single pros video that they have. Scott Martin, Wheeler, all those guys. I mean, every single buddy, just to learn from them. I know I'm trying to think. Bass U is really good. Just whatever you can get. You can just literally search probably hummingbird down imaging, school of bass, and you're probably gonna see a bunch of stuff about it, or like how to read it and stuff. But a lot of my stuff is I just went out there and tried to learn it. I mean, that's why I'm really confident in certain things, because I kind of went through the trials and error of learning it and making the mistake. You can learn a lot, but at the end of the day, you do have to get down there and just.
Well, I think one of the cool things that you've done is for the people that maybe don't know or haven't started following you on social media, you post all of your settings for your graphs from all the tournaments that you fish. So if you a certain lake or a certain depth, or you're keyed in on certain something, you go through it and walk the people through how to set their graphs up and where it's at, to kind of give them a baseline to work from.
Yeah. And that's one thing, it's kind of interesting to go back and look at all of it. And because, everyone's messaging me like, hey, what's the magic setting? Like, I can't figure it out. And there actually is no magic setting. It's like fishing. There's no magic crankbait to just pick it up and catch fish all day long everywhere you go. Each lake is different. Each area lake is different. So it's really, it's a little bit of a challenge in itself. It's kind of like a fun little game to tweak your settings and get everything as perfect as you can to get the most out of them. I think a lot of guys just turn them on and go, and that's fine because these units are so good. You're still going to see stuff, but if you take it to the next level, you can get a pretty good advantage on things.
All right. So a lot of guys, once you make that leap to the elites, right? Like you kind of have that feeling of like, I made it, right? I'm accomplished. How do you keep that fire going? Versus like, I think some guys may or may not feel a little bit of burnout once they reach it, because they realize there's still a whole nother like leap. There's a whole nother hump they have to climb. How was that transition for you? Like once you accomplished it to really like push to go a level further?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm in that situation right now. I just think you just learn really quickly that how good the guys are and how consistent they are, whereas each tournament or each level you go up, more and more guys are consistent. You get into the opens and there's, a quarter of the field or a half of the field is really, really good. You get in the elite series. I mean, the guys in 60th place are going to be in 70th place in some of the biggest tournaments in the world. So, it's just the guys are really good. And I grew up in a really competitive environment. I played high level hockey where we'd play 70 games in a year and we'd lose, or we'd win 65 of them. So I don't like to lose at all. And the competitiveness for me is really easy. I mean, I don't like it. It sucks, dude, when you have a bad day and it's out there on the leaderboard and everyone can go look at it. I mean, it's embarrassing. So for me, I mean, I try to win every time. I mean, that's how I have the competitiveness. I don't know how it is for some guys. Some guys, what fuels them is I don't want to get kicked off the elites. I don't want to qualify, or I don't want to miss a classic. I don't want to lose this sponsor that I got. But for me, it's all about trying to win every tournament.
So, and I think that you kind of hit it there too. Like you talked about it in your younger tournament, and you talked about it there. I think some of the best learning experiences come from those tournaments where you blank or you have a really crappy day, and you're in that mode of like, you're either really distraught and you say like, it just wasn't my day, or you say like, all right, this is a learning experience. What can I take out of this tournament so that the next tournament, like, I don't ever want to feel like this again. So what can I take away from this so I don't ever feel this way? It sounds like you've kind of taken that second approach versus the first approach, saying like, oh, it was equipment, or it was this, or it was that. Instead, you just kind of look at it and say, all right, what was my weakness that I had?
Yeah.
And how can I improve upon that for the next tournament?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even when you do well, I think you still have to do that. Unless you have the biggest bag every single day of every single day of that tournament, there's always going to be things to improve. If you're a perfectionist, and I think most of these guys are. But it is funny. Like you can have a bad tournament, and you got to be in that mindset of you got to keep improving. You don't want it to happen again. But it is also crazy, like how slim the margin of error is from having a good tournament to having a 70th place finish. It could be the difference of breaking off a 6-pounder and not winning a limit. So it is crazy. Like not everything is what it looks like. And that's what makes it almost frustrating, whereas the public is going to be like, oh man, this guy's had a bad tournament. And, I knew he wasn't going to catch him on that. But in
Right.
reality, it was just something so minute that creates that. But I think you need to evaluate every single day you're on the water, whether you do good or bad, because there's always gonna be room for improvement. The minute you stop working towards that, you're gonna get left behind in a hurry.
So some guys take a notepad with them out in the water, or like take notes in their phone. Like, what do you do? Because you run helixes on your boat, right? Or do you run solixes?
Solix, yeah.
Okay. So the Solix has a touch screen. You can run waypoint management, but what kind of notes do you put in for like waypoints, or do you take notes on the water of like the temperature, the season, anything like that?
Yeah, and I'm kind of getting into that right now. I have a pretty photographic memory, which helps. But like my newest thing is I'm kind of like after the end of each tournament, I'm just writing down quick notes, things I think might help me in the future. But the problem is things change so much. So, you can write down like, hey, I caught him here April 20th, 2018, and, come back 2 years later on that same day. And it's probably, the reality of it is probably not gonna, be a productive spot again. It just, the fishing changes so much, conditions change so much. So you kind of have to keep an open mind. I think, maybe putting down notes like, hey, we had a huge rainstorm, the water came up a foot and the fish got into the shore grass. That's going to be more beneficial than actually getting real specific and into like, dissecting each little spot. That's kind of my take at it. That's how I look at it. And as far as waypoints goes, I don't get super like detailed, I guess. For me, it's pretty easy. Like I just color code my stuff. All my waypoints are the same. So there's not like, giant stop signs out there and little mini ones. They're all the same size, all the same icon for the most part, but it'll be like red is a really good spot. Blue is brush, green is grass, yellow is average. Things like that. White is something I want to try. So I got my own little system.
Now, is it true that you guys all delete your waypoints like at the end of the year? Do you guys just start back over for practice?
I don't delete anything. Okay. I probably need to a little bit because I notice when I show up to somebody's lakes, I'll run over to a spot. I'm like, I wonder what this is. And then I realize I'm like, oh yeah, this is that spot from 2 years ago that I didn't delete. So that I meant to delete. But I don't think you should ever delete hard objects personally. Okay. If you caught them on like in a schooling pocket or something, that's one thing, but I don't know why you'd ever delete a brush pile, in my opinion.
Like, do you think some of that is like I noticed, like you said, up here in Erie, St. Clair, we fish areas and there may not be fish on the structure, but we always waypoint it and we always come back to it because eventually at one point in time, there's going to be fish on it. Do you think that's part of that mentality of why you don't delete those?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe it's more comfortable to have those spots to fall back on, but it's just really tricky, You have to use your old history in the right context. You just can't get into, or at least the things that have happened to me, and it's happened to me exactly on Lake St. Clair. The last 2 times we've been there is when you get down, it's midway through the day and you're starting to struggle. It's like, oh man, let's go here. I caught 20 pounds here. Let's go here. I've caught them here. I caught a 5-pounder here. And then you really get into, a dangerous situation. Instead of saying, oh, this is a grass edge where I caught them and I just caught 2 on a grass edge over here. Let's go try that. You start worrying about what you've caught on other spots instead of what they actually are. So it's really, it's really tricky, but I think it's important to have old spots or old, things that you found just to have in your back pocket to use when necessary.
Yeah. And then, breaking down a piece of water, like one thing I want to talk about, like you said, you fish a lot of reservoirs, you fish the Great Lakes a little bit. I guess the question would be, so now if you were to approach a lake that you've never been to, how do you go about breaking down that water based on the experience that you have?
Yeah. First things first, you want to kind of have an idea of what's going to be happening. And that's pretty easy to get. You're going to put the boat in the water, see the temperature. If you're going there in April, you're going to probably think, oh, yeah, April in the south, they're probably going to be spawning, something like that. Just get a kind of an idea of what phase the fish are going to be in. But for me, when I start, it's always, I'm going to do what I want to do. It doesn't mean necessarily like, hey, I love to flip. It's all I'm going to do when I go to a place is flip. But it's, hey, this lake, it looks like a great crankbait lake. I want to go crank it. That's what I'm going to do. Cause I always feel like you're going to have a better tournament or better results if you're doing something that you're truly enjoying in. So I'm not saying not to be a well-rounded angler, but I mean, it's weird as it is, sometimes you just put the boat in the water and you're like, man, I just want to go throw a spinner bait. This looks perfect. They should be eating a spinner bait, go and do that until it's not working and then start adjusting. Cause I kind of feel like you can go to these places and really enforce what you want to do and have success most of the time. As long as you're not going to like, if you're going to go to St. Clair and say, hey, I want to go throw a popper because I love topwater fishing in November, it's probably not going to work, right? But if you're staying within those phases of the time of year and what the fish should be doing, that's how I feel like you have the most success. I mean, I think if you look at guys that win tournaments, it's usually in their wheelhouse. You don't see a power fisherman go out and blow away a tournament on a shaky head. I mean, you got to kind of go and fish with how you truly love to do. So that's really how I do it. I mean, I think about where the fish are going to be doing. I think of a couple of things in my mind of what I want to do. And I go and I try to force that until it's not working. And then I'll back off and, slow down or reevaluate the situation. But always, always start in your wheelhouse with your confidence.
Now, when you're pre-practicing for tournaments, like you just kind of talked about, fishing to your strengths, but do you go out in some of these practices or pre-practices, I should say, like when you're going out in the water, scoping out areas before it's off limits, do you try any techniques to learn how to throw a shaky head on ledges, or do you do any of that stuff? Because obviously it's stuff you don't get exposure to up here in the north.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think of like when I went to Lanier, I pre-practiced Lanier and I went and learned how to throw an underspin. When I was there in December, I've never really even thrown that bait up here, so that was cool. But pre-practice, so it kind of depends on how much time I have. Like if I have a couple of days, I will, or if like I feel like I'm gonna go and catch some fish. Like when I'm gonna go and pre-practice at Sabine River, I'm probably not gonna learn a technique there. I'm gonna spend my time riding around looking at the place instead of trying to catch one of the 10 fish in that river. So you kind of feel it like that. If you're at a really good place, I think it's definitely beneficial to sit there and fish for a little bit with one of those regional techniques that maybe you're not up to date on, and just get confidence with it. And then that way, when you come back, you're not worried about how to use it. You kind of already feel like you got a grasp of that technique. So that's one to feel out.
So what's a piece of advice you would give to someone trying to come up, like currently today, whether it's high school to college, college to pros? What would be one piece of advice that like you wish you had?
Yeah, easy for me, man. Fish with as many people as you can, and fish co-angler if you don't feel like you can really, or if you're not feeling really comfortable about being a boater. I think it's my biggest downfall to date, because and it's worked out good because everything I do on the water are things that I've truly learned, which is good because I'm really confident in it. But some of these things may have taken me 5 years to learn, where if I got in the boat with someone as a co-angler, it might have taken me 5 minutes. So I really believe in fishing with a lot of people, fishing co-anglers, just, seeing what everybody does. Because essentially you're just spending a lot less time, a lot less money trying to learn things instead of going out there and doing it yourself and banging your head in the wall when it's not working and things like that. So that's really my biggest piece of advice. And I know it sucks because, a lot of guys want to rush to the front of the boat, as did I, because you want to compete, you want to do all that. I drew this guy and I was better than him, and it does happen all the time. But even when you have maybe a bad draw, you're going to learn what not to do. So
yeah, I think my buddy drew he was a co and he came up and fished St. Clair and drew a guy that wanted to go largemouth fishing on St. Clair, and he was like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that definitely happens, but you could even have 100 bad draws. You draw Greg Hackney once, and it might make everything worth it. So yeah. I would recommend that. And it's saying, if you're a boater, then that's fine. But try to fish with guys that you don't know. Pair up with someone and go fishing with them. Go fishing with a buddy you've never been with. All these little things. To bounce ideas back between 2 or 3 people, you just learn a lot more than going out there and doing it by yourself. And it's something I still have problems with this to the day. And I've been trying to reach out and, get in the boat with more people and, take advantage of what they've learned and, sharing some of your stuff too.
Who would be somebody that you could name off the top of your head that you bounce ideas off of? Would it be somebody like Pipkins, like another Michigan guy, or
Yeah, definitely. Right. I talk to Chad a lot. Greg DePalma and we talk a lot. Chad's kind of funny because me and him are real similar. We always fish the same spots. It's probably just because we grew up here. We got the same idea. But like Greg's an interesting one. I mean, he grew up on the East Coast, so he looks at things a lot differently than I do. So it's pretty neat to get his perspective on things and then, give him mine. We both kind of, open each other's eyes to certain ideas.
All right. So looking at practice, like what would be, walk me through like your first day of practice when you get onto a body of water. Do you take a rod out of the rod locker, or do you literally graph all day? Like some of these guys talk about.
Yeah, it depends. If I'm in an offshore tournament and I know like it's going to be a ledge tournament or it's a situation where I can graph them, I'll spend most of my time side imaging for sure. It's what I got confidence in. I feel like I'm really disciplined with it where I will do it all day and not stand up. And I feel like it gives me an advantage. So I'll do that. But if you're in the spawn, it makes no sense to go out there and ride around. Like maybe you'll find a rocky point or something that has some fish, but you got to kind of get up there and get on the troll motor and kind of fish around and get a feel for things. So, but if it's an offshore tournament, or I should say this, whatever the tournament's going to be or whatever I think is going to be won, I'm spending my time doing that. And it's very rare in these tournaments nowadays with all the information that or something happens or the tournament's won in a way that you weren't thinking of. So, you can know you're going to Eufaula in June. Hey, we're going to win it on brush piles or on ledges or something like that. Hey, it's going to be Santee Cooper in April. It's going to get one off site fishing. So you got to know those things coming in. You got to research and then spend the majority of your time doing that. But also, put a little time to do something crazy, to do something off the wall. Cause you can, that could be a way to have a really good finish or to catch a bonus fish or two that guys overlook. So, it's a statistical game again, where do you want to spend your time? How do you do it? But that's how I do it. I always spend my time, most of the time, doing what I think the tournament's going to be or how the tournament's going to be won.
Now, do you look at like any historical like information on tournaments in the past and like that time of year and where they were at? Do you use those references?
I do, yeah. I have a huge spreadsheet broken down on a lot of these places about like baits that were used, weights, stuff like that. But you gotta, it's tough because the industry is actually changing so much with all these new baits and new electronics. So like you don't want to look at something in 1980 on Pickwick and be like, oh man, we're going there in June. It's probably gonna be one on a spinnerbait and wood, because that's not gonna happen. So you got to be smart about it. But yeah, it's definitely good to look at old things, baits. You might find a really unique bait. Like if you're gonna go to Texas, a red bait's probably gonna play, whereas some other places it's not gonna play as much. And then you want to know kind of a weight that you're going for. If you're getting 4-pounders in practice, it'd be good to know, hey, these are winning fish. Hey, I'm going to finish last if I catch these. So you got to kind of have an idea.
Yeah, I think that's pretty crazy. I don't think, I don't know if you saw this here. We had a BFL on St. Clair that had like 22 20-pound bags. It was ridiculous. Yeah. But it's just funny to see those weights come up. And guys, I'm sure when you're coming in with a 21, 22-pound bag, you're feeling like pretty good about it. And then to get 20-pound bags, it's just kind of crazy to run into those scenarios. So
it is, yeah. And then if you're going to go research St. Clair and you're going to be 15 years ago, you're thinking 17 pounds is going to win. So you have to definitely be smart about it.
So what's a lesson you've learned along the way that isn't talked about much? Like maybe a little bit of some juice that you could share that is, something you've learned that nobody really talks about it. Maybe it's a bait or a technique or sitting behind your graphs or something you've picked up along the way that you feel is like just that little piece that you've always wished you had.
Yeah, that's a good one. Let me think about this. That's a really good question. I'm not going to get into like a bait or anything. I'll be a little bit vague. I don't want to say vague, but a lesson I've learned from fishing the Elite Series And I think it almost kind of shock a lot of these guys that just fish 1 day tournaments is how little these guys have to go on sometimes, or most of us, like we always kind of joke that the ideal practice is just having like a clue. It's not, you're not gonna, in 3 days on a lake that's huge, unless you're just gonna spend it in one creek arm. You're not gonna go out there and be like, oh yeah, I need to line up on this point, throw this way and then line up with this blue house on over here. Your practice a lot of times is, hey, I'm gonna be running 5 to 10 foot areas with a crankbait. I'm going to be fishing shore grass. I'm going to do this. I think it really amazed people to see how little, or just that little clue that we have. We're not out there really looking for spots or really exact things to do on the water. It's just all about grabbing little pieces and then getting, whatever the hint is and then running with it for 8 hours. And a lot of times you run with it on water you've never seen in your life. So I think that really shocked people. And that's one thing, I always fish 1 day tournaments before getting to the opens. And it was, I mean, to win a 1 day tournament locally, you need to be dialed into, hey, I'm going to go here. I'm going to throw this bait, like this. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to use this bait. If they're not biting, I'm going to this bait. But if in these multi-day tournaments on lakes you're not familiar with, that's just not realistic. It's just getting a little bit of hint and turning it into, 20-pound bags, which is just crazy. But that's how this game is played.
So that is pretty crazy. So it almost sounds like the tournament's almost an extension of practice. Like you're
for sure.
starting to get dialed, and then you kind of just turn it up as you go.
Yeah. And I mean, there are times like if you're in the summer and you're looking at schools of fish, that's probably an exemption or yeah. But in the spring and the fall when you're fishing, I mean, the tournament is practice. It's extremely rare to win these things off 1 or 2 spots. It's extremely rare to win them doing the thing you were doing on day 1, on day 4. It's just, you have to keep moving. You have to keep adjusting, and it's pretty crazy. And then it's crazy when you go out and do it, you feel like you've done something and everyone else, has done the exact same or better than you. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And then, so here's kind of another oddball question.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to lose it all and had to start back from scratch, what would be your process and steps to get back where you are today?
Like how much did I lose?
like if you lost your spot in the elites,
okay.
And you just had to grind back from square one, how would you go about like making that happen again?
Yeah. I was a guide and I fished the opens, so I'd probably start there. If that's the answer, if I have that much money or if I have a boat. If I don't have a boat, I'd start as a co-angler. I'd go try to win a boat. Then I'd go to the boater. Then I'd go up that way. But yeah, I think you just get back into the opens, and do it that way. And you kind of have to stay on top of things. It's tough to take off like 10 years and step away and then come back because like this, especially right now with the electronics and everything evolving, you kind of got to stay in the rhythm of things. But that's what I would do. I mean, you got to obviously financial. You got to have a financial backing to do this, or you got to have some money saved. So you're going to want to kind of find a job that fits the schedule and then just get back and get to qualifying. I mean, it's certainly brutal trying to make it here. I mean, it's that the odds are so stacked against you. It's ridiculous. But I mean, if it's truly what you love to do, you figure it out, or at least you try to.
Yeah. I think my buddy and I calculated the odds of winning a 200 boat tournament, just because of some of these super tournaments that are going on. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of discussions about like different boat manufacturers contingency and this and that. And you break it down and it's like on a 200 boat tournament, if everybody's equal, you have a half of a 1% chance of winning that tournament, just statistically right off the rip before you even factor anything else in. I think it's guys don't really understand how difficult it is, but obviously guys can do it. And what's even crazier is when you see guys that are consistently at the top.
Right.
It's like KVD did it for so long that it's just crazy to think about. You can have that probability and you can just get little edges here or there to give yourself a fraction of a bigger percentage, and it can extrapolate into a career like that. It's just
right. Yeah. It's similar to like poker. Everyone's like, oh, it's a game of luck. I mean, and in some ways it is, but how are the same guys doing well every time? So there's obviously something you can control, and you just have to play the percentages and put things, put yourself in the best positions to do well. I mean, that's kind of all fishing is, and it's like all poker is. You're playing with what you have. You're putting yourself in the best position to succeed. So.
Now, one of the pieces of advice I got when I was having a sidebar discussion, which is kind of what generated the idea to start these little podcasts, was a little discussion I was having with Cliff Crochet at we were at the Blazer factory, and we were just talking, just shooting at doc talk. And one of the things he said that really kind of struck home, and I don't know if you can attest to this, but he said, dude, everybody that says at the local level that you have to dominate at the local level at the BFLs, said it's all crap. Said a lot of that stuff doesn't translate. It doesn't mean anything. And when you get into the bigger multi-day tournaments, and ultimately you're starting almost back over at square one and like redeveloping as an angler when you start getting in multi-day tournaments. Is that kind of what you've experienced too?
Yeah, it's probably gonna depend where you live. I mean, I'll say that. I mean, I wasn't super dominant where I lived, and I always joked like, whatever, it's a natural grass lake, I don't care. But it, it's tough. Like a guy that lives in Alabama and dominates on Gunnersville and then goes to Chickamauga and wins big one-day tournaments, he's probably gonna be good at the next level. But yeah, there is something to definitely fish in multi-day tournaments. I mean, it's definitely a little bit of a skill in itself, or a different skill in itself than a one-day tournament. But typically guys that, I would say you need to do well. You don't have to win every tournament by any means, but you need to feel comfortable that you're making good decisions to put yourself in good positions to do well in local events before you jump out and fish some of the opens or something like that. I'll say that. I'm not saying you got to go out there and win everything, or you got to cash a check in 80% of the time or whatever, but you need to feel comfortable fishing those one-day tournaments that you can make decisions to do well before you move on.
All right. So now we're going to go into like a 10-question lightning round, and then we'll just kind of wrap up. So these are 10 questions. It's the first thing that comes to mind, and we don't got to get into like any crazy like explanations, but we'll just do this really, really quickly. Okay. So number one is your favorite lake.
Favorite lake, smallmouth, St. John or St. Lawrence River, spotted bass, Lanier, largemouth, Lake Fork.
And for everybody that doesn't know, Lake Fork's where you caught 100 pounds of bass.
Yeah, so I kind of got to put that one in there.
Smallmouth, largemouth, or spots?
Smallmouth if I'm fun fishing. If I'm fishing tournaments, I'll go with spots.
All right. That's different. I didn't expect you to say that.
Yeah, I'll say I feel like if you know how to smallmouth fish, you really should be able to know how to spotted bass fish. I always feel really comfortable doing that. So
they kind of caught me off guard. Like I said, I went down and caught my first Alabama spots. Like we've caught Kentucky spots and everything. When I was down at Lake of the Ozarks, we kept spots down there too. But the Alabama spots are a whole different animal. Like it's as close to smallmouth fishing as you can get, and the fish actually, fight wise, I think we're like right up there.
Oh yeah, definitely. They don't quit. I mean, they're just. I remember catching my first spotted bass. I was like this big. And I was reeling it. I was telling I'm like, oh man, this is a good start to practice. Man, that's a good fish. And I brought it and I was embarrassed. But yeah, they certainly fight. They're a lot of fun to catch.
Yeah. Favorite non-electronic piece of equipment on your boat?
Oh, that's a good one. Like engines count or
whatever's your favorite piece of equipment on your boat.
Just not count the graphs. Okay.
It's not count because everybody would say graphs. Everybody would say.
Oh, I got to go with the Ultrax. That's right. Changed my life
for sure. It's definitely changed fishing. What's been your favorite tournament thus far in your career?
That's a good one. Probably Lake Fork. I mean, that's been my best finish, so I'll go with that.
All right. What tournament are you most looking forward to in 2021?
Another good one. I'm looking forward to going back to the Tennessee River, actually. I fished my first classic there, my only classic there. And I felt like I figured it out right at the end, and I ran out of time. So hopefully we can have a lot better tournament this time.
So real quick, describe what that's like to somebody that's never experienced the classic.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, especially me, I've never been to one. And I did that on purpose because my whole thing was, I'm never going to go to one until I'm fishing it. And then you get there and there's thousands of people and it kind of throws you off because you don't realize it's as big as it is. So that might not have been my best idea. But yeah, the hype, it's almost, and it's why you see this. I don't know if anyone's ever won it their first try. And I might be wrong for saying that. Well, obviously the first one was, but there's so much excitement around it. And there's so much distractions that it's just incredibly hard to stay focused. And then when you get out there and you finally make it to the tournament you're there with the 50 best guys in the world. I mean, they're all only fishing to win. They don't care about points. So that makes it tough to beat them. And then there's so many people on the water, all the spectators, and there's a ton of locals out there trying to fish too. It's madness. But it's really cool. I mean, it's really exciting. Like my problem there was I was so jacked up, I just was simply fishing too fast. Like literally for a full day, and then like 3/4 of the next day, I was literally reeling my bait too fast. So I'm excited to kind of settle back down and see if I can do a little better.
All right. So what's your favorite on the water snack?
On the water snack, I only eat two things on the water. I have these organic protein bars that I'll have, and then I'll do peanut butter and jelly, and I'll eat those, or like really really healthy peanut butter and jelly, like organic peanut butter, all that whole wheat bread, and I'll eat them every 1.5 hours.
So how do you when you're on the water, off the water, you guys travel a ton. How do you guys avoid not eating a ton of road food?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, if you're gonna drive 12 hours in a day, like it's probably gonna happen unless you're gonna pack a cooler. Like I stop, but when I stop, I try to eat Subway, or something like that. I don't stop at McDonald's or some of that stuff. I just make the best choices I can. Not saying it's perfect. And then when we get there, we normally stay at a house, which is a lot better than a hotel, just simply because you can cook your food, prepare it, put it in a fridge if you got extra. So you kind of do that. But the reality of it is, it's just you're not gonna be perfect, but you just try to do your best. Some guys it doesn't matter to them, but I always feel better when I'm eating better. I feel like I got more energy and I'm making better decisions.
Yeah. So what's your biggest largemouth and biggest smallmouth?
Biggest largemouth, 9 pounds even. And that was my first fish I caught practicing for the Elite Series last year. Very first fish. So
that's a pretty good cool. One.
Yeah. And then smallmouth is 6'8".
Okay.
That was actually on a bed during a tournament.
What lake was that at?
Hubbard Lake.
Okay.
Michigan, yep.
Yeah, you're way up there. Biggest learning lesson on tour?
I'll touch back. Keeping an open mind. And as far as like not getting caught up into spots and stuff, going out there and fishing each day as a new day of fishing, as a new day of practice. Because once you get caught up and you start trying to rely on things that were happening a couple of days ago, you get left behind.
So the last question, I had spinnerbaits or chatterbaits, but I don't really feel that fits very well. So my other question is going to be Chatterbaits. All right, my man. The question I think I would replace that with, even though you already answered it, would be, are you a fish to win kind of guy, or are you a guy that likes to get 5 fish, then go for kickers?
Yeah, fish to win. But that's one part of my game I'm going to switch up a little bit. Not say I'm not going to try to win, but I do some incredibly risky stuff because like second place to me, and I know it sounds wrong, it's a disappointing. It's a disappointing feeling never to win a tournament or not to win the tournament. So that's how I look at it. But I'm certainly going to take a little more of a safe approach in some of these deals because I just realize it's just impossible to get on the winning fish for 9 tournaments in a year. And you need to realize that before you go out there and completely bomb a tournament. You need to realize, hey, I didn't figure it out. It's not happening. Let me go play it safe, get a limit, and move on for the next one, So.
And I think that's where guys look at I don't think guys realize how hard it is to win AOY on the elites. Like this year, I think maybe put it in perspective because like Brandon won, Polinick won 2 tournaments and didn't make AOY.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think guys really understand how difficult it actually is.
Yeah. And it's just like, golf is a really hard sport, but at the end of the day, you know what it is going to be, you're going to be golfing. The greens are going to be cut like this, they might change a little bit, but realistically, it's kind of the same thing every day. If you're a really good golfer and you have the best swing, you're going to give yourself a chance to win. And in fishing, it almost doesn't matter. You can be the best guy at casting. You can know how to tie the best knots. You can be using the best equipment, but you're literally going to a different course every single week. And it's really tough to stay on the top.
And it's constantly changing, like even throughout practice.
And you can't see anything, you're not seeing the holes. So it's really tough. So those guys, when you have a good season, you're at the top. It's certainly an accomplishment.
So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to sit down with you this first interview and go through this, and I appreciate you sitting down. I know we've gone back and forth, and we've tried to get together and get up on St. Clair, Erie, and stuff like that. But I really felt this first interview, I wanted to sit down with you, being a local guy, being in the elites. I feel like I don't know how to describe it. Like it's everybody in the area, there's a lot of local guys that look at like you and Pipkins, but I think it's almost kind of forgotten that you guys are doing this because you're from Michigan and everybody's so focused in this region during the season that I think a lot of guys forget that you guys are doing this on a way different scale than what a lot of these other guys are. So I appreciate you sitting down. I appreciate you taking the time out, and it's been a great time.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate being the first. So, I think this is a cool idea that you got going. I'll be looking forward to watching what you got coming out. And now that hopefully COVID settles down a bit, we will definitely get on the water next year. So
for sure. I appreciate it, man. Thank you. And for everybody else that's out there, we've got some more coming. I figured this off season was going to be one of those times we could take advantage of it, everything that's going on, and try to put something together. So this is awesome.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.